afraid of the dark.
This story is about an American writer who travels with his friends to the mountains of Arizona to gather story material for a new novel. But what he encounters there really makes his blood run cold and causes a fierce fear. I wish you a pleasant listening, and please subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Matt Gallagher was a brilliant writer, praised by his friends, girlfriend Emily, and local newspaper editors. Known as Long Matt for his youthful basketball prowess, he now crafted chilling tales and novellas. Dean Frost, the editor of Mystic News and Matt's jovial high school buddy, had declared a week ago at his 40th birthday celebration, "You'll surpass Dean Koontz, Stephen King, and others if you do everything as I tell you, buddy." Matt mysteriously smiled, holding a glass of expensive red wine, politely refuting his friend's grandiloquent speeches. Yet surpassing the acknowledged masters of the genre and becoming globally famous had been his lifelong dream. He aimed to prove to his sweetheart Emily that he was not a failure who had abandoned the basketball league for creative projects, but a great talent in literary arts. That evening, Frost fueled Matt's ego, painting vivid pictures of his future successes and exposing his poorly hidden vanity. "It's all about the material you use, Matt. You're already good at what you do. And if you write about the legend of the Superstition Mountains in Arizona, and Mr. Lee from the Portland Times publishes your novella, I guarantee you 100% fame and a worry-free life. Let's relax for a couple of days at my cabin, have some whiskey, and I'll outline our plan. Why would he publish my writing, Dean? I've sent him manuscripts 3 times in the past year, but all I got was silence." Matt objected, nervously adjusting his thick red hair, secretly hoping that Dean was telling the truth. "He will definitely publish it." Frost winked at him. "I have an idea. That's it. Emily is coming. She'll send us to the other guests now." In fact, Dean Frost's plan led to Matt Gallagher sitting pensive tonight, gazing at the dancing flames in the fireplace, preparing to settle scores with life. The heavy 6-shot Smith & Wesson revolver gleamed with cheerful lights on the long stainless steel barrel. He stared at the weapon intently. The revolver lay in front of him, just a foot away from his nervously twitching, scratched fingers, and Matt knew that if the revolver ended up in his hand, nothing could change his decision. Actually, he didn't want to change it. Death seemed a better outcome than what awaited him ahead. It was inevitable and monstrous. Better death by his own hand than by theirs. He spent the last moments of tonight's evening sending Mr. Lee the electronic text of his latest work. Making the agonizing decision, the writer recalled all the incredible events of the past week. The day after the editor's anniversary, Matt and Dean set off for the Arizona mountains. Matt had inadvertently mentioned the trip to his girlfriend Emily, who also wished to accompany them. She didn't like Matt being out of sight for long. The road to the mountain range was exhausting and long, and no matter how fast Matt drove Frost's car, exceeding the speed limit, they didn't make it by nightfall. After relinquishing the driver's seat to Dean, he tried hard to spot the local natural beauties in the remnants of the dying sunset. In the ensuing twilight, Matt couldn't even conjure up sketches of landscapes, so necessary for the atmosphere of his future plot. Before the headlights of the car, only gradually increasing in size, appeared the black bulk of the Superstition Mountains, long hiding part of the horizon from travelers. To the surprise and even some excitement of the arrivals, the deserted mountain cabin, once belonging to Frost's great-grandfather, greeted them, tired from the long journey, with the soft wandering light of a burning candle in a small window with a cruciform frame. Here, far from civilization, in the wooden crooked little house in the middle of nowhere, anyone could be. The old, rusted pickup truck with deflated tires, staring blankly at the travelers with its surviving round headlight, didn't add any optimism. Maybe we should go back to the hotel. The one near the gas station, Emily timidly suggested, nervously twisting a golden lock around her finger. She had been silent for the past couple of hours, not wanting to interfere in the professional conversation between the men, but now, noticing their agitation, she became tense herself. A flock of large bats whirled and soared high into the air next to the car parked on a small platform in front of the house. This frightened Emily. She was afraid of almost all animals, from dogs walking without muzzles to the smallest insect accidentally flying into her apartment. Spiders and other arthropods were a separate category of her phobias. And of course, bats. Such a large number of nocturnal flyers caused her genuine shock. It's 60 miles back to the hotel through the mountains and narrow, dangerous roads. This is not a highway. Most likely it's my Indian friend. Although old Grizzly was supposed to come here tomorrow morning, that's what we agreed on. Come on, Matt. We're men, after all. And we're sitting here hesitating like indecisive girls. Frost confidently unbuckled his seatbelt and swung open the door of the SUV. Take the gun and let's go, at least we're armed. Matt pulled a revolver from his travel bag, turned to his companion, theatrically spun the gun cylinder with his palm showing off to Emily, and put on a fierce expression. The already nervous girl looked at him with horror in her eyes, then back at the house where the candlelight had moved from one window to another. She whimpered and huddled in the corner of the back seat of the car. She had a bad feeling again, one that had plagued her for most of the trip, like when a reckless driver had hit her beloved cat Fred. She wanted to hold back both men, but they just laughed at her fear. However, not trusting Matt's gun, Dean grabbed a shotgun and a Remington 870 from the trunk, one of the most popular and possibly best pump-action shotguns in the world. There could well be unsavory characters in the uninhabited house, like vagrants or worse, escaped criminals. Hey, open up. Dean pounded the shotgun against the wooden, groaning door, secured in 3 places with rusty metal strips and sloppy rivets. Fine debris and dead, dried insects fell from under the door's top crosspiece. Dean paused for a moment. How foolish it was to knock on the door of his own house. The candle in the window went out, leaving only the headlights of his Touareg to illuminate the front of the house. The bright beam of artificial light also revealed the prickly creosote bushes and wild raspberry shrubs encroaching closely on the house, their nocturnal movements casting eerie shadows. However, nothing scary or unexpected happened. The door opened, revealing an elderly Navajo couple. There were no Indians from other tribes in the state reservation, at least not nearby. They explained to the bewildered editor that Dean's grandfather, who passed away last year, had allowed them to live here and look after the house until his grandson Dean came, who had not visited him in years. Both elderly people looked excited and even a little frightened by the nocturnal guests. The conversation with Dean and Matt was led by the man, as the old woman didn't speak English at all. She only angrily scolded her elderly husband in short, choppy phrases in their native Navajo tongue. It's the 21st century, Matt thought. while Dean ran to the car for the generator, while he was busy contemplating the old Indians who kindly invited Dean and his company into their own home. Drenched from dragging the heavy generator alone, Dean returned with Emily. She finally dared to step out of the car but continued to twist her head in all directions, as if afraid that flocks of awful bats would swoop down any moment and mess up her perfect hairstyle. Matt entered the house last and looked around. The house was well appointed inside. Old, but not yet completely faded tapestries adorned the walls. Polished carvings adorned the banisters and staircase railing leading to the second floor. Carefully dusted wooden furniture, and two wide benches with folded woolen blankets at the head. Inside, the house seemed much larger than it did from the outside, especially considering the presence of a basement. Frost's great-grandfather had worked hard at the beginning of the last century to create this secluded dwelling. "Make yourselves comfortable here in the living room. My wife and I will go upstairs," the old Indian, who introduced himself as Hook, gave all three newcomers a heavy look, and then groaning, began to climb the stairs after his wife. He clearly didn't like Dean's rumbling diesel generator, installed near the semi-rotten porch of the house, and the carrying handle with a lamp extended into the living room. The heavy lantern in his hand trembled with each step on the stairs, threatening to fall and start a fire. How much fire would it take to ignite the old wooden house? "Well, let's relax, guys." Dean Frost pointed to the big bench for the couple, and as soon as Matt and Emily settled in, he went out onto the porch to turn off the generator. Darkness instantly enveloped the house, completely filling its space. Emily and Dean fell asleep almost instantly, but Matt tossed and turned for a long time, listening. Finally, he too succumbed to the rhythmic snoring of his friend and the faint sniffling of his girlfriend. Last year, Matt had been seriously ill. During his illness, he was constantly plagued by nightmares, but they were nothing compared to the identical dreams that had come to him 3 times tonight. Vivid and containing the full range of sensations of real life, they completely captured his consciousness. Matt dreamt of Dean, Emily, and another unfamiliar man in a gray leather jacket with yellow stripes on the sleeves. All three looked absolutely motionless on the platform near the mountain cabin, facing away from Matt, who had stepped out onto the porch. They seemed to be welcoming the sun, which showed a piece of reddish disk over the pass, down the road to the editor's house. The people stood in a line, holding hands and not moving. Emily was between the two men. Matt stepped down from the porch to ask why they were behaving so strangely, but they didn't react at all. The writer had to go around them from the front to get their attention. A choked cry escaped his chest when he saw their faces. Unfortunately, they were not faces at all, but bare skulls with bits of flesh clinging here and there to the shrunken, bluish skin. The hands they used to bind themselves into a chain were no better sight. Swollen, decaying fingers with detached nails intensified Matt's panic. Only the hair of the nightmarish trio was in order. Words stuck in Matt's throat, and he could only gasp for air and frantically punch himself in the side with his fist to feel pain and wake up. But the dream refused to release him. Then, without making a sound, the creatures seized him with their clammy, vile hands. Silently, they began to pull him from side to side like a rag doll. Their mouths started to open. They hissed, growled, trying to tell him something, but they simply couldn't. They had no tongues. With an incredible effort, Matt broke free from their grip and ran towards the house, hoping to find salvation there. However, he was stopped at the porch by the elderly Navajo couple, the current occupants of the Frost House. They stood at the threshold, laughing at his fear and roughly pushing the frightened man away from the house. Matt was surprised by his own weakness and the incredible strength of the frail old people. Then they caught up with him, the three of them. The dead hands grabbed him in an iron grip, tearing his skin, ripping muscles from bones and gouging out his eyes. Matt screamed and woke up. "Shh, you'll wake everyone," crybaby Emily, still half asleep, hugged him tightly, indicating with her demeanor that it was too early to get up. The sky outside was just beginning to lighten, warning of the imminent sunrise. Unnoticed, Matt fell asleep again, attributing everything to the side effects of his profession, new experiences, and the previous day's long journey. He woke up only at breakfast, feeling sore and with a headache. Emily sat, absorbed in her laptop, while Dean chatted with the old Indian man about something. The editor looked sad and frustrated. The old woman was there too. She sat on a red plastic chair, listening intently to every word her husband said. "Something happened?" Matt asked his friend. The old man fell silent, and Dean turned to the writer and spoke. "Old Grizzly, also Navajo, got attacked by a bear 2 days ago. Or maybe wolves got him. Hell knows. Hook says the park rangers identified him by his clothes and brown boots. His leg muscles, face, and neck were almost completely eaten." The editor recounted the information he had heard from Hook. The last sentence made Matt break out in a cold, sticky sweat. What if? Did old Grizzly wear a gray jacket with yellow stripes? He asked, recalling his nightmare from the night before. "How do you know that?" Dean exclaimed. "I didn't tell you about it. Hook just told me what the corpse was wearing." Matt just shrugged, deciding not to recount the contents of his nocturnal nightmare to his friend. After the editor's words, the old man's wife angrily muttered something in Navajo, pointing her finger at Matt and Dean, then jumped up from her chair, grabbed a checkered bag from the wall shelf, and hurriedly left the house. Probably to gather wild raspberries abundant in the area, or to the tiny town at the foot of the mountain range, although it was more than 10 miles away. According to Navajo customs, it's not good to talk about the deceased until they are laid to rest or cremated, and old Grizzly is still in the morgue. The old man explained her displeasure. "I need to go. My wife has wandered into the bushes twice already. I need to keep an eye on her." The old man left after his wife, and Emily looked questioningly at her friends. It was quite chilly in the living room. She hadn't even emerged from under the warm blanket, with her laptop on her knees. Of course, she had heard all the news from start to finish, and before that, she knew that old Grizzly was the main part of Frost's plan, which the editor had used to lure Matt into the distant trip. "If Grizzly can't help us anymore, then we'll have to ask Hook to tell us all the local legends," Dean suggested, bewildered. "I don't see any other way." He wearily sat down on the edge of the bench and began to inspect with interest a large millipede, the size of his palm, crawling out of a gap in the crumbling baseboard and waving its long antennae. The millipede stopped and, in turn, stared at the editor. At least that's how it seemed to Matt. "Ew," gross, Emily squealed, immediately pulling her legs onto the bench. "She's beautiful," Dean asserted unequivocally. "Don't you dare insult her. Let her come near me, and I'll show her," the girl hysterically exclaimed. Their quarrel, usually amusing to Matt, seemed unnaturally strained and out of place this time. "Guys, I think we need to get out of here. Immediately. I had a bad dream," he said, carefully choosing his words, fully aware of how ridiculous it sounded coming from him, someone who had written hundreds of horror stories. "You've lost your mind," Matt Dean muttered angrily, still not taking his eyes off the creature he was examining. "Your dreams are ready-made plots, so please sit down with your laptop and write before you forget. Hook will tell us local legends after lunch. You've got a lot of work ahead. Nobody's going anywhere." Matt looked helplessly at Emily, seeking support, but she seemed hypnotized by the millipede that Dean was staring at. "Emily," Matt called. "What do you want?" the girl replied gruffly, still not looking at him. "Dean's right. The sooner we hear from this old man, and the sooner you do your work, the sooner we'll be home." "I don't like it here." Both of Matt's interlocutors were behaving decidedly strangely. Matt didn't like that they wouldn't look him in the eye and were staring at the cursed millipede. Moreover, the nightmare still vivid in his memory wouldn't let him rest. But what could he do? The car belonged to Dean. Emily was siding with the stubborn editor. Of course, his pleas would be just another scary story to them, something he had concocted. "Do we have plenty of fuel for the generator?" Matt asked, trying to divert the editor's attention from the motionless arthropod. This time he succeeded. "About 40 liters, I guess. We can gather firewood, and we'll have light from the fireplace in the evening. I saw some dry trees not far from here. We don't even need to drive a quarter-mile down. I'll get some fresh air," Dean said. "Maybe I'll go. I'll think about something. I have my Remington, don't worry, I'll take it with me. And an axe, of course." The editor stood for a moment, pondering something, then cast a disappointed look at the spot where the millipede had been and left the room. The car alarm beeped, then he retrieved a rifle and an axe from the car. Matt crawled under the blanket with Emily, not knowing what to do with himself. He definitely didn't feel like writing, until Hook and Dean provided him with material to work with. He could pester his girlfriend and try to relieve some tension. Guessing his desire, Emily also showed initiative. The fact that the old folks were nearby and could enter the living room at any moment only fueled the excitement of the couple. After half an hour of passionate sex, they fell asleep. They were awakened by Hook coming downstairs. The old Indian looked disapprovingly at Matt and Emily and announced that it was already 3 in the afternoon and time for lunch. Matt was extremely surprised that most of the day had passed. It seemed like they had just closed their eyes with the girl. "Where's young Frost?" the old man asked Matt in a creaky voice, completely ignoring Emily. "He went for firewood this morning," Matt replied, concerned. "I think we should go check. Maybe he decided to sleep there or wander around. He's prone to that." "Yes, go. And our wives will prepare lunch in the meantime," Hook agreed. The Navajo briefly left the living room for the cold pantry, giving the guests time to dress, and returned carrying a woven bag with baked meat, covered with wide green leaves and generously sprinkled with pink berries. "Can your wife make a side dish?" he asked Matt. "She can," Emily grumbled reluctantly, taking the provisions from him, secretly pleased that the old man referred to her as Matt's wife. She had been dropping hints about marriage to her partner in various ways, but he always brushed it off with a joke and postponed the important event for her. The prospect of cooking with the old lady, with whom she couldn't exchange a word, did not please Emily at all. but she chose not to argue. Since they would have to spend several days here, it was better not to quarrel with the local Indians. "Go, Matt. Hurry back with Dean," she pecked the writer on the cheek and headed to the kitchen. Her morning aggression vanished without a trace. Matt put on a warm jacket, slipped a revolver into his pocket, and left, accidentally slamming the door too hard. Passing the car, he glanced back at the house and shuddered. The elderly inhabitants of the house were staring at him intently from both front windows on the first floor. Their old, yellow, wrinkled faces, seeming glued to the dusty glass, made the writer shrink. He turned away and walked down the road. "We're all a bit on edge. The old folks just live without people for so long. We're a novelty to them," thought Matt, slowly descending from the house down the mountain serpentine, the roadway of which was surrounded by bushes and small, withered trees from all sides. The search for frost dragged on. The dampness and some unfamiliar smells permeated from everywhere. Matt, who had lived his whole life in a city apartment, was not good at recognizing the scents of plants, although, as befitting a good writer, he had a considerable baggage of theoretical knowledge about nature. There were no traces of Dean anywhere. Obviously, the chubby man, not finding dry branches here along the road, decided to go further down. A little later, in two places on the roadside, Matt saw small, neatly stacked pyramids of dry wood. "That's it." He decided to gather more firewood, Matt realized. His mood lifted, despite the cold, penetrating wind, which nullified the deceptive warmth of the cloudless, sunny day. He started humming a song about cheerful Roger to himself, and then noticed Dean sitting on the roadside at the next bend. The stout editor was sprawled on a rotten dry log, and it seemed like he was asleep, tilting his head back in such a way that Matt couldn't see his face until he got very close. Matt's good mood vanished instantly when he saw the chilling sight. The paralyzed writer couldn't believe his own eyes as he gazed upon Dean's flesh-stripped face and empty, bloodied eye sockets, which were never destined to see anything again. The face was exactly like in his nightmarish dream. The Remington, splattered with clots of dried blood, lay right there, propping up the dead shooter's white sneaker with its plastic butt. The deceased, apparently, never had a chance to use it. The tubular magazine of the 5-shell shotgun was full. The grass around the body and the fallen log was flattened. Large dry branches were piled up. Dean was attacked when he was almost done with his work. Matt stood over his friend's body, painfully pondering what to do next. The juxtaposition of dream and reality completely knocked him out of the usual reality track. For the first time, he came face to face with the materials of his stories, although he had visited the city morgue several times to study the intricacies of plot description. But those were completely unfamiliar, faceless human bodies. A completely different perception of reality prevailed here. Now he himself, not his readers, felt the horror in his heart, and his palms were sweating with fear. He took off his jacket and mechanically covered Dean's head with it, not understanding why he was doing it. Immediately he felt the cold wind penetrating under his clothes and chilling him to the bone, despite the thick knitted sweater and insulated jeans with fleece lining. At this time of year, monsoons constantly blowing from Canada took away all the warmth from the Superstition Mountains. Emily Matt's thought pierced him as he compared all the facts and mentally drew the further plot. Grabbing Dean's pump-action shotgun, he ran back as fast as he could. 2 out of 3 people from his dream had already died a terrible, agonizing death. Now Emily was in danger, and if he didn't hurry. Damn old folks, it's their doing. Maybe they somehow control the wild animals. Maybe they're up to some other dark deeds. It doesn't matter. I need to save her, thoughts whirled in the head of the running man with a gun in his hands. To take Emily and get out of here. Then to the police he repeated mechanically, like a mantra. Running uphill is quite different from going downhill. Especially in dense, heavy clothing and with a 4-kilogram Remington. Even for a former basketball player, such effort was not easy. After a few minutes, sweat poured from Matt like a stream, and he began to gasp. And he hadn't even run a third of the way. His legs tingled from the unusual strain, ached and refused to obey. Only the thought of Emily spurred him on, forcing him to continue moving at the same pace. Having covered most of the way, Matt finally slowed down his pace, conserving energy but not stopping. Nevertheless, he was completely out of breath by the time he reached the solitary SUV parked near the house. The old, battered pickup truck at the makeshift parking lot was nowhere to be found, but that wasn't what concerned the writer at the moment. A new wave of horror engulfed him as he passed the creosote bushes on the final bend, realizing he was too late. But he refused to believe what he saw until the very end. Emily's decapitated body sat in a pool of her own blood beside the car, leaning against the poorly closed door of the SUV. It was impossible not to recognize her by the bright red sweater and the golden bracelet he had given her for Christmas on her pale wrist. He had spent a whole day searching for the right item to please her. The cursed house door swung open, and from it, as if from the jaws of hell, emerged both elderly inhabitants of the mountain dwelling, moving strangely sideways. The old man and his wife resembled mannequins more than living people. This comparison came to the bewildered writer's mind as he was spellbound by their appearance. Meanwhile, the Indians turned towards him as if on command, smiling widely with unnaturally large, black, toothless mouths. Their smiles stretched from ear to ear, quite literally. They didn't make a sound, but to immobilize a fear-armed man, it wasn't necessary. Their horrific appearance was enough. Normal people couldn't have such stretched jaws, nor glassy, lifeless and completely white eyes without pupils. Matt acted instinctively. Pulling his freezing consciousness out of the grip of overwhelming fear, he emptied the Remington's magazine with shot after shot towards the monsters and hurled the emptied gun aside. Then he grabbed his revolver from his belt. He emptied it into the monsters in his. Shooting at the horrifying Indians had no effect. Their silhouettes, like frames in an old black and white movie, only twitched with each hit, as if the bullets created some interference passing through them. But this didn't stop them from floating in the air, without moving their legs or touching the ground, towards the horrified writer, exhausted from the useless gunfire. And then Matt made the only right decision to run. Down the road, anywhere to run, but as far away from this unimaginable place, breathing death upon him, as possible. Where did he get the strength from? He didn't approach the car. He didn't even think about using the SUV. He simply wouldn't have had the time. Matt ran like he had never run in training, feeling the spiteful hissing of alien monsters behind him. To his agitated hearing came an increasingly loud rustling, not from the wind, but emanating from the silent, inhuman chaser's elongated jaws. The frantic race seemed to last an eternity, as Matt thought. For some reason, he didn't let go of the revolver with the empty cylinder, although the box of spare cartridges remained in Dean's car. Matt ran out of breath again, losing strength, and at the next turn, he accidentally stepped on a protruding stone and tumbled down the road, rolling downhill straight under the wheels of a sharply braking police jeep. The 2-ton vehicle barely managed to stop, but the rider still collided with the powerful metal bumper due to inertia. In Matt's dimming consciousness, the muffled gunfire above him was reflected, and he blacked out. Matt woke up in a Phoenix clinic. His bruised and scratched body ached and poorly obeyed, and he felt slightly nauseous. "You have a concussion and multiple bruises, mister," Callahan said, the short, bald doctor, and added, "The policeman who brought you wants to talk to you. He's here right now. How do you feel, Letterman?" Matt barely whispered. "Just for a short while," the doctor said disapprovingly. Into the room walked a sturdy, gray-haired man in a police uniform with a sheriff's star on his chest. He was as tall as Big Matt. "Good day, mister." "Callahan. I'm Luke Ferguson, sheriff of a small town whose name won't tell you anything. You're lucky I was nearby when the wolves almost caught up with you." "Wolves, yes. 2 huge creatures, which I scared off from my old friend." The policeman lovingly stroked the worn holster on his thigh. "Tell me, mister Callahan, how did you end up there? And where did your companions Dean Frost and Emily Payne disappear to?" "They're dead, Sheriff. Unexplainable and terrifying things happened to us, but you won't believe me anyway." "I still can't believe it myself." Tears welled up in Matt's eyes. "I'll listen to you," the sheriff said calmly. "I've never seen such large and agile wolves. I fired 6 shots and didn't hit once, and I'm an excellent marksman, Mr. Callahan, I assure you." And they seemed to dissolve into thin air as they fled. Stuttering and trembling as he recalled the details, Matt shared his story with the sheriff. The sheriff remained silent for about 5 minutes, then spoke. "I didn't quite believe in all sorts of fantasies, Mr. Callahan, until I encountered something that defies rational explanation myself. Evil Navajo spirits killed my grandfather, just like they did your friends. And last year, 3 tourists stopped at a gas station to give a lift to 2 local Indian old-timers. Neither the tourists nor the Indians were ever seen again. No bodies were found. There were other cases where wild animals showed aggression towards people, although they usually avoided them." "What are these evil Navajo spirits?" asked the writer. "Disanakwa, beings from the lower world of the dead, capable of taking any form. Once they were ordinary people, but tortured to death. They cursed themselves and now seek revenge on all the living who trespass on their territory." "Can they be killed?" "I don't know. Shooting is useless. Local Indians say their remains can be burned, but I'm not sure if that would help. And how to find their bodies. The mountain area is huge, and I don't know when they were killed, by whom, and under what circumstances. Certainly not recently. I've reviewed all the reports in my district for the past 10 years. But if I were you, Mr. Callahan, I wouldn't worry about that." "What should I worry about?" Matt asked tensely. "It won't leave you alone now. Regular weapons won't protect you. Try to get away as far as possible, that's my advice to you. If you want to solve the problem differently, here's my business card." "Will I be blamed for Emily and Dean's deaths?" the writer asked softly. The sheriff shook his head negatively and, bidding farewell, left the medical ward. 3 days later, Matt Callahan was discharged from the clinic, and he headed home to Nevada. He didn't plan to run away far. At least, not until late evening when he saw the smiling old Hoka leaning on the low fence of his property, watching the path to the writer's house. The monsters found him hundreds of miles away from their habitat and staged a cruel game, which perhaps amused them. They appeared to Matt in every reflective surface, constantly whispered accusations of the deaths of his loved ones into his ear, and inflicted horrific nightmares. In 2 days, Matt turned into a nervous wreck, finding solace only in occasional bursts of creativity so dear to his soul. Tonight, he finished his last story and emailed it to Mr. Lee. There was nothing left to escape the obsession. Decent Aqua stood behind him, their semi-transparent bodies slightly refracting the sunset light coming through the French windows. You brought them to their deaths, he heard the ominous whisper for the 1,000th time right next to his ear. The writer's hand reached for the loaded revolver, feeling its pleasant weight. "Damn you," Matt yelled angrily at the monsters, aiming the gun. He pressed the cold barrel to his temple. Then his gaze fell on Emily's photograph lying next to a stack of books on the table. No, she definitely wouldn't want him to die like this, succumbing to malicious supernatural will. The rage that had been building up in him since the deaths of his friends completely consumed him. Matt turned around and aimed the revolver at the smiling monsters. "I suggest you kill me right now, because otherwise I'll find your damn rotten corpses and burn them to hell to a surprise." This time the Decent Aqua retreated. For how long? He didn't know, but he knew exactly what he needed to do. He took out the sheriff's business card from his wallet and called his only ally in this fantastical battle. "I've been waiting for your call, Mr. Callahan," he heard the familiar voice. "Glad to hear you're still alive. I want to get even with them," Sheriff Ferguson, Matt said firmly. "I ask you to meet me tomorrow morning at that gas station near the mountains. I'm sure the solution to our problem is somewhere near the house of my deceased friend." After these words, the writer hung up. Now only vengeance filled him and gave him strength. Matt Callahan's latest story delighted fans and caused a sensation in literary circles. Critics praised it unanimously, citing the vividness of the narrative, the fullness of sensations, and the emotional depth of the characters. Editors from renowned publishing houses sent him collaboration offers one after another, but the writer seemed to be oblivious to them. On reader forums, particularly curious fans speculated that they had seen him more than once in the Arizona mountains, and then, according to rumors, he completed the business at the scene of his friends' deaths and left with the former sheriff to search for missing people in the state of Colorado. There his trail was lost. Apparently, Matt had found a new hobby.